Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Farm Spaces. I'm going to allow Mr. Ted Blom to introduce himself and maybe just tell us a bit about what he does. We can take it from there.
I've been involved in the energy area for about 40 years. I started off by working at Eskom, where I was involved in the finance department. And for my sins, I was then also involved on the mining side, given that buying of coal is a critical operation for Eskom. And from there, I moved over the years to one of the mining companies that had a problem with its Eskom contracts. And my job there was to fix those up. And that mining house was the old Genco and is now known as Billiton, and then has morphed into South 32, where I was then the commercial director. After that, I moved into senior management and a finance position, and later on to PA to the chairman. I ever called back to Eskom in 2000 to sort out some tax issues for them. And then in 2006, I got a call to say that they had big problems in securing coal. They'd gone back on the documentation and seen that I'd played a role, and they wanted me to come back. I went back to Eskom for 2 years on a contract, and the first thing I picked up is that things were very, very different to what they were during my first stint at Eskom. A lot of the people that were contracted or employed by Eskom at the time didn't seem to have clear job descriptions. They didn't seem to understand the topic of procuring coal very clearly, and they still have today, in fact, since 2001, an emergency procurement protocol. Now, that emergency procurement protocol was put in place because Eskom ran short of coal at Majuba because the mine failed. But that was to become a free-for-all gravy train where most of the corrupt coal deals started going through. And that morphed on and became bigger and bigger and bigger until we got to the stage where everybody is now aware, where the Guptas were heavily involved in some corrupt deals selling coal to Eskom with Eskom's compliance and agreement. I picked up all the corruption. By 2006 to 2008, when I was there for my third time, the more I mentioned the word corruption, filed papers, the more I found that I was being stabbed in the back. And it just showed that corruption at that stage already very well entrenched within Eskom, and anybody who didn't comply or wasn't complicit in the corruption was seen as an enemy. With that, my contract came to an end, and Bongani Nkwababa, the finance director at the time, extended it by 10 years so that not only that I could secure the coal that I'd identified that Eskom should have done, but also to try and help sort out the corruption. He then left because of the pressure of corruption, and I was left unprotected. Notwithstanding a 10-year extension to my contract, when the base contract expired, I got a telephone call at night to say, don't come to the office tomorrow morning. So I then immediately said, well, this can't continue like this. I went to NERSA and I said, listen here, there's a big problem here at Eskom with the coal contract. It's very, very corrupt. While I was busy talking to NERSA, the corrupted Medupi and Kusile contracts were done. I had seen some of the documents before I left Eskom. What was happening while I was out of Eskom was even worse. At that stage, NERSA wasn't very interested. They said, no, man, you're just a disgruntled employee. We're not going to worry about what you say. And they ignored me. And I went to every presentation since then, from 2009 through to the most recent NERSA meetings on tariffs and pricing, then trying to voice on behalf of the consumer. And then what I've picked up, the current tariff regime of Eskom and then, of course, the municipalities, because they just load onto the Eskom gravy train, is totally corrupt, is 800% above where it should be. So nobody in the country is paying less, if you add in all your costs, less than 2 rand a kilowatt, and you shouldn't be paying more than 50 cents a kilowatt hour. So the whole thing is upside down, and that has resulted in more than 3 million jobs being lost because of companies closing down, especially mining and foundry companies and smelters. So yes, as I complained more and more over the years, I had more and more attacks on my personality, and eventually I had an attack on my house. And then, of course, I've also had an attack by the current president when I mentioned that he seemed to be getting some favors from Eskom. You can go and check it out on the president's website. It's still there, in fact, 15th of April, 2015. I won't give up the fight on behalf of the consumer until we've got it sorted out. I have also laid charges against the current Eskom management for the corrupt Duva coal supply agreement, where the beneficiaries, like in Medupi and Kusile, is the ANC via Tebe Investments and Bata Trust. On the first day that the new owners took over that contract from South 32, the coal price was doubled, and you and I have to pay that double price because it'll come into our tariffs. I've laid 4 charges together with NUM and SAFTU, Mr. Vavi, but it seems to me the police are either unwilling or unable to prosecute those cases. So what I'm next going to be doing is, together with NUMSA, Mr. Jim, we will be taking that to the public protector because we have to get this set right because it's skewed. Our exports aren't as competitive as we should be, and it's killing our people. People cannot afford electricity. There are people who are sitting in the dark with children at school who need to learn and study in the dark because we can't afford electricity. That's the one thing. We can't afford it. The second thing is it's unreliable or not available. And that's just a culmination of all the corruption, which culminated last week with the explosion of Unit 4 at Medupi. Once again, the configuration of that unit, as I said on TV, is not according to protocol, worldwide standards. Once we have that investigation, and I believe I'm going to be appointed an expert witness in that matter on behalf of the unions, we will get to the truth eventually.
Thank you so much, Ted, for that. And Shu, it's a bit discouraging to know that we are being robbed in broad daylight, excuse the pun. How one can be self-sufficient then? We can't rely on Eskom. Please maybe shed some light on your knowledge with solar energy, wind power, and so forth.
Let's start off with who are the most ripped off people in terms of electricity. The farming community, especially seasonal farmers, who are penalized for 12 months on maximum demand, are the most ripped off society out of all of Eskom's customers because they only need high electricity consumption for 1 or 2 or 3 months while they're harvesting, and for the rest of the year, for 10 months or 11 months, they pay a penalty price for their electricity. So for them, it's the most beneficial to get off the grid. So those people can get a hold of me, and I'll gladly get them some quotes from people that I have some measure of control over so that they don't get ripped off. We'll take that countrywide eventually. But yes, there are solar solutions. One might need to reconfigure some of your farming, but there's also gas turbines. And very, very soon, within the next month or two, just sorting out the technology contracts, we will have micro and medium-sized hydrogen plants, which are unbelievable technology. It's not yet available in the market. And I've been asked to launch that solution to the African market. So I think there's hope. There's lots of hope. And the hydrogen solution should come in at least at what the Eskom price should be, which is 50 cents a kilowatt hour, or a lot cheaper. If it's more expensive, then obviously I'm not going to even propose it because my aim is to get people cheap electricity, which will stimulate their businesses and stimulate jobs in South Africa.
Thank you so much, Ted, for representing us farmers, because you are correct in the sense that we do use electricity and our electricity bill is never a pleasant sight. Now we have my co-host for this evening, Sinesipho Tom from Food from Mzansi. Hi, Sinesipho. Is there any question that you'd like to add on and ask Mr. Ted?
Hi, Gugu. Hi, everyone. Ted, I'm speaking to you. Farmers have suffered, substantial losses and have experienced severe interruptions at the hands of, Eskom's power cuts. When Eskom announced that they have completed building the last generating unit at Limpopo-based Medupi Power Station, there seemed to be an energy of optimism in the country. Some farmers thought maybe some of their farming woes would improve. However, we were told by energy experts that, Eskom's completion of the last generating unit at Limpopo, the Medupi Power Station, would not make a difference in the lives of farmers. And I just wanted to find out from you in terms of, our electricity crisis in the country. How far are we from fixing all these power plants across the country to get to a place where we can be sustainable or make enough electricity to prevent power cuts from taking place in the country?
I partly agree with Mr. Stein. We are behind with our power purchase program. The reason we're behind is Eskom has run out of money because of corruption. For the price of Medupi, we should have got 20 new power stations. Not one, 20 new power stations. And I've got an example where in India, at the Mundra power station, it was started at the same time as Medupi. It's a similar configuration. In fact, it was going to work off South African exported coal, and the price on the grid was commissioned fully in 2012. In other words, on time, 4 years of construction, was 48 cents a kilowatt hour. So, yes, a lot of things have gone wrong with Eskom, and they can't operate Medupi and Kusile properly anyway because they haven't been completed. Medupi still needs scrubbing. They are polluting the world around Lephalale like you can't believe. In fact, Medupi, while it was running all 6 units, was the worst polluting power station in the world because it hasn't got the scrubbers which they committed to when they got the money from the World Bank. That's the one thing. They can't do the scrubbers because somebody stole the money that was supposed to build the new dams in Lesotho. Phase 2 of the Lesotho Highlands dams, because that needs the extra water to scrub the chimneys from dust and sulfur and everything, Medupi. That's the one thing. The other thing is, and this is where Eskom has lied to you consistently, they've blamed the old power stations. Time and time again, you see them coming on TV and saying, well, our fleet is 37 years old and power stations are unreliable and old. That's nonsense. I know of power stations around the world that are over 100 years old and still operating fine, but because they've been properly maintained. When we had load shedding, Eskom again lied to you. They told you it was level 2 load shedding. I've got a graph from Eskom showing it was 5,085 megawatts off the grid at 6 o'clock in the evening on the 2nd of June. And the fantastic Medupi power station that evening, instead of 5,000 megawatts generation power, couldn't manage more than 2,080 megawatts of power on the grid. And Kusile was also less than half of its rated output. So the problem is we are being lied to by Eskom. And as you can see, we're now facing the consequences. The problem is, and this is a major problem, and I think everybody needs to make their voice heard, we cannot invest, whether it's in farming or in industry or anywhere, with an industry or with a utility that is corrupt to the core. The current management signed the double price coal contract on the 1st of June. It's corrupt. The current management are the ones that are lying to us about the level of load shedding. The 2nd of June should have been at least level 6 load shedding, which I forecast, and then I was surprised that I was wrong, because over the last 14 years, I had yet been to be wrong. Then when I did the investigation, and with help from people inside Eskom, there are some good people there, I got the graphs which showed that Eskom had actually lied.
That's a lot. Ted, I was speaking to you just last week after the explosion of the Medupi plant, and you're telling me that this has caused, extensive damage to the Medupi power station's Unit 4 generator, and it may lead to load shedding from last week until Christmas, even beyond the 6 provinces that have already experienced load reduction. Can you tell me, why do you think, such an explosion had occurred? Do you think that the Medupi power plant was, constructed?
So let me just add one statistic from the last week. On Tuesday, we had level 1 load shedding. Eskom dumped 990 megawatts of power off the grid, didn't announce it, nobody knew about it, except people started phoning me and saying, hey, our suburb is off. And that's besides the 6 provinces where they were load shedding during the course of the day. In fact, it was Sandton CBD that was off for more than 4 hours on Tuesday. As far as Medupi is concerned, that accident should never have happened for 2 reasons. Firstly, the local protocols weren't followed. Let me just explain to you there. Eskom has maintenance team on standby all the time because these things can break anytime in 24 hours. And I'm not sure that they do a competency test to see that the maintenance team that's on duty is fully functional across all the skill sets that's required. That's the one thing. The second thing is that team that was on duty on Sunday night last week when Medupi 4 blew shortcut the protocols. The protocols were as such that there was room for them to be short-circuited. And that shouldn't be allowed. When you're working with critical instruments, like flying an airplane or a jet or something like that, or doing an operation, there should be checks and balances all along the system so that no one person can short-circuit the thing and endanger the life and the economy of somebody else. So, secondly, the team that was on duty on Sunday night did shortcuts. And the third thing is Eskom's protocols, Eskom's rules of operation allow shortcuts. Because if they didn't allow shortcuts, this accident wouldn't have happened. Now, the problem is that same protocol is applicable to Eskom's 89 other generating sets. So there can be more explosions like at Medupi because Eskom's head office protocol is defective. And this has been taken up with Eskom, and in their arrogance, they've told the person who took it up with them to shut up. So that's not the way to deal with people who are trying to help you and highlight big risks that you are running in your operation. So yes, the team shortcut, so maybe they needed to be suspended. But what's worse is there shouldn't be scope for anybody to shortcut Eskom systems. The system should be so-called foolproof. And that is not the case. And that's where I've been asked to assist with the inquiry, which the unions are now demanding. And we will see where I think major defects are. And it's not just the workers that should be taking the brunt of this. This is a management issue. This is a director's issue. How can the directors, if they know what they're doing, allow defective processes to be Eskom-wide?
Okay, fine. We understand that now we've identified that, Eskom has these challenges, which is not just only affecting, farmers negatively, but the whole country. But if you can, put a particular focus on farmers, how does Eskom's, woes affect farmers in the country? If you can just unpack that for us.
Let me give you a very old example. When Eskom was asked to join the farmers to the grid, and they said they could do so more effectively than anybody else, the farmers paid. Now Eskom saying, no, you must keep on paying that money, despite the line being finished paid, because we now need that money to maintain the line. But there's no Eskom people maintaining those lines. That money just disappears. I've got calls from farmers, in fact, in the last week. I'm going to mention names. I had a call from ZZ2, who's one of Eskom's biggest farming clients. And for 6 months, they couldn't get a response out of Eskom. 6 months. I've had another case in Zeres, where for a year, they've had problems with the transformer, jumping voltages all over the show, burning their machinery. And when they took action by switching off the transformer, Eskom were first ones there to come there and charge them thousands of rands in a tampering fine and cutting them off from the grid. So those are the type of problems. The farmers are paying a massive line fee, which should have been paid off long ago. They're not getting any service. They're paying the most expensive rates in the country in terms of penalties for power that they don't use if they're seasonal farmers. And frankly, the whole tariff structure, as I said, is 4 times higher than what it should be. This will be taken up with the public protector because NERSA is not doing its job.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ted, for that. I'm really glad that you are really mobilizing to change this because it's quite clear that we as farmers are getting ripped off and it's unfair. It's just to put it plain and simply. Now we have Mr. Chris. Hi, Chris.
Hi, everybody.
We just want you to maybe introduce yourself and tell us what you do.
My name is Chris Kitter. I'm from a company called Sonfin. We had a couple of applications that we sent through to Eskom for connection. It was roughly in the region of 100 to 150 applications for farmers that wanted to connect solar plants on the Eskom grid. Then what happened is, boom, they were NERSA. NERSA had on their website again advertised that they have a process in place that you can get a registration for solar plants that's connected onto the grid and feeding back onto the grid. And then it was then at the stage find it out that no, there's no registration process in place from NERSA's side. They only have a licensing process. They eventually got process in place for us to register plants up to 1 megawatt that we didn't need licensing. So after we got that in place, it took us in the region of 4 to 5 years to get the Eskom process in place for applications to get to connected onto the grid and then to get the NERSA registration process in place to connect 1 megawatt systems onto the grid. That's where we are now. So 5 years later, we're moving into 10 years and currently we are connecting systems successfully. Most of our farmers are seasonal farmers, so their power usage are very high than other stages in the season, and that's why banking is such a good scheme for the farmers in South Africa. Just to a bit elaborate, then Mr. President said to us that he's going to open up registration for up to 1 megawatt. Everybody was excited. Things are going to happen now. We are be able to build a system for help with load shedding. Then the new problem came in. There's no process at this stage at NERSA that will allow any system that is bigger than 1 megawatt to register. They need to set up a process first to register plants that is bigger than 1 megawatt. As we all know, NERSA, I don't think that will happen in the next 6 months. So up to next year, maybe, if lucky, then there will only be a process in place to register plants bigger than 1 megawatt, if we're lucky. Then the second thing that we've got, Eskom is only allowing farmers to connect systems up to 1 megawatt. That is allowing feedback onto the network and do banking. If you want to build a system bigger than 1 megawatt, that's now for our big farmers on the outside. If they want to build a system that's bigger than 1 megawatt, they will be able to do it. But that power that they export back onto the grid, they must use in the same month. They can't do banking over a 12-month period. So then, yes, we've got 2 problems. First problem, NERSA doesn't have a process in place yet to do registration for bigger than 1 megawatt for the agricultural side. And then the second problem that we've got, Eskom doesn't have anything in place at this stage. Are looking even at it to allow farmers to connect systems bigger than 1 megawatt onto the Eskom network and do banking on that.
Thank you so much, Chris, for that. And we've spoken about the problems. The problems are there, something that we need to address. But at the same time, we need to be speaking about solutions. So, Chris, I'll ask you this question. When it comes to solar panels or wind turbines, depending on which region you are, how effective is it? How efficient is it? And if I am going to now invest in putting solar energy on my farm, how is that in comparison to relying on Eskom?
With the scheme that Eskom has in place where you can install a system up to a megawatt and you can do banking and exporting onto the network over a 12-month period, there's lots of positivity around Eskom and renewable energy. I'm very excited for that. And the farmers that I'm working with, I can call a couple of them. It's the Karsten Group. It's big farmers and they are very exciting on what is happening in the renewable energy side. So, renewable energy for a farm like Karsten Boerdery, you can't take that farm off the grid. You won't be able to do it. There is no financial investment solution that's big enough to take a farm that size off the grid and install batteries and install generator. So that is why this is such a good opportunity where a farm have the capability to generate up to 70% that you want to get rid of Eskom, but can work with Eskom or together with Eskom to make it possible for farmers to generate their own electricity.
Thank you so much, Chris, for that wonderful explanation. And I really want to get into that.
Karsten Boerdery, which is an impressive farming operation. So is ZZ2. They among the biggest in this country. And I'm curious whether you have practical advice for smaller scale operations, farming operations, who they don't have the resilience of, for example, a ZZ2 or Karsten Boerdery. Eskom is messing up as it does. It's these farmers that pay a hefty price. I'm looking forward to read more about you on Food from Mzansi. You have a lot to offer farmers in the practical sense. Thank you, Ted. It's also fascinating.
So a lot of farmers cannot handle the load shedding because they've either got sensitive products like chickens that need to be cooled or frozen or other items that need processing on an urgent basis. So more and more, as Eskom becomes unreliable, the farmers are going to have to look to either put in emergency power, which is very, very expensive, or to find something that will fit their demand profile. And I think that's the part that Chris alluded to, is that one size doesn't fit everybody. Some farmers have got a lot of biomaterial that they can use in digesters to make their own electricity. You need to get somebody in who can just run the numbers for you, and somebody that at least got a track record, that's not going to run away with your money, and somebody that has an understanding for what your needs are and just doesn't want to oversell you stuff that you can't afford. We have got the hydrogen stuff coming on board, and then it's critical that the farmer needs to have somebody that he can trust. What nobody understands, if there's any financial genius in this country, it's our farmers. They need to be able to survive for 10, 11 months with no income, and then they get a little bit of income. And then they gain another 10 months, and I'm not even talking about droughts and forces of God. Whatever solution needs to be scoped to the right size and also needs to be durable or robust enough to take care of varying cash flows.
Thank you so much, Sid. That really explains a lot because I was going to ask you guys the scalability, and obviously it depends from farmer to farmer. So I think the advice that we're getting is that we need to consult and get the right people to tell us the numbers, how much we are going to be saving if we really invest in this new technology. Sinesipho, would you like to add something?
Yes, I'd like to add something. So when, Chris was speaking about, even though getting your own alternative power, you can be connected to the Eskom grid. When we were speaking last week, he told me that, being connected to the Eskom grid has its disadvantages. One that particularly stuck out to me was how he mentioned that even though you have your own, alternative power source, but you're connected to the grid, if Eskom experiences blackouts or load shedding. So for me, kind of felt like, what's the point? When I asked him this, he said that, reason why some farmers are still connected to the Eskom grid, it's a lot cheaper than it is to actually start your own power plant that is not connected to the grid. Can you please explain to me how that works?
As Eskom is experiencing load shedding, your solar plant is switched off as well. I won't go into detail, the AC/DC stuff. But if Eskom is load shedding, your solar plant is off. So now the solution to that is and it's a solution of cutting your administration fees on the Eskom side as well. When load shedding is happening on Eskom grid during the day, the generator is starting up. That generator is starting up your solar plant, your small solar plant. Your solar plant is then generating power, and it cuts on the fuel of the generator that's using. So now you've got a saving of up to 60% on your generator as well, while Eskom is load shedding. And you can still go on with your operation on your farm. You can still do irrigation. You can do still what you need to do. That is a solution that you can do without investing millions of rands, like, for instance, your ZZ2 or your Karsten Boerdery farming unit will do. So now, a simple unit like that, you've got a payoff term of roughly between 3 and 5 years that you pay off your solar farm, you pay off your generator, and your internal line system that you build on the grid access. You pay off with the money that you save with the administration fees on that 5 Eskom points. You pay off in less than 12 months. You pay off your internal line. And that is a solution for our small farmers. What is nice about Eskom now is Eskom had two types of applications or connections. They had a low voltage connection and they had a medium voltage connection. So a medium voltage connection, so they did make it possible now for the small farmer to be able to save money on the first place, up to 70% on the energy. And secondly, to look at the solution of a grid access, grid interactive system, where if there's load shedding, you can run a generator and a solar farm simultaneously so that your operation can go on.
Chris, I mean, that system that you've described works well when the sun's shining, but it doesn't work when Eskom's most frequent load shedding is, and that's in the evening and in the morning peaks, because the sun typically only generates power when it's good enough for you to go outside for a tan or go to the beach. Typically early in the mornings or late in the afternoons, sun power is not strong enough. So when Eskom then load sheds or has problems feeding, the interactive system also falls over, or else you're going to have to use the full capacity of your generator and need a much bigger generator than just one to run the admin side or the control side of your solar farm.
Yeah. So that's why I said that when a farmer is moving into, or a small farmer is moving to see what renewable energy can do for him, he must make sure that the company that he decides on sits with him and then show him exactly what you are saying now. Okay, but if we do a grid interactive system and we look at the statistics around load shedding and we look at how long Eskom do load shedding, are a grid interactive system going to work for you or is it not going to work for you? It won't ever be able to satisfy 100% of our farmers.
But we're going to get to a situation, especially now with the collapse of Medupi 4, for at least 2 years or if not longer. But I mean, Duva 4 has been off for more than 6 years and not being repaired. And as Eskom's finances deteriorate, I'm expecting to see longer and longer, like we've seen in Mozambique, like we've seen in Zimbabwe, like we've seen in Zambia, longer and longer non-available periods of power supply. Unfortunately, the reality of a utility that's busy dying, that's inefficient, corrupt, doesn't have a committed workforce that looks after its customers. Farmers are customers like everybody else. But because farmers, when they have a problem, is a solar person, nobody listens to them. If the townships have a problem, they tend to get listened to far more quicker than the isolated poor farmer.
In terms of the maintenance also, I know farmers really want to get into this new technology, but how economical is it? Is it something that we need to be saving up for? Is it going to really dent our pockets, but it's for the better good? Because after 5 years of paying it off, we no longer have to worry about these things. Chris?
That is where, again, you need to make sure about the decision you make of the supplier or the EPC you're going to use to install your solar system for you. For example, Sonfin will look at a fixed unit to install on a farm, a fixed unit that is not following the sun. We call that system where it follows the sun. When you've got moving parts on your system, the moment you've got moving parts, you look at maintenance onto your system. So we want our farmers to have as low as possible system. And that is where you install a fixed unit that's either connected onto the roof or onto your ground mount systems. We advise our farmers rather to look at ground mount systems and not at rooftop installations. The reason being is that we don't have any statistics in South Africa of systems that is older than 15 years that's been installed onto a roof. So we don't know what is the maintenance of that roof after 15 years. So when we do consultation work with farmers and they do have lands available, enough space available, we would rather advise them to install a system on the ground, maintenance-wise. Your solar systems are very, very low maintenance systems. To answer your question around bad weather, if you've got rainy days and stuff like that, we make use of a system that gives us data of a certain area. And that is how my engineers designed the system around all the information that they can get on what is happening in that area weather-wise to get to the actual size of the system.
Sure, that sounds pretty cool, Chris. How you would advise for land space instead of solar panels on our roofs. So do we need like a lot of space for these systems?
There's a simple sum that you can make. For a 50 kilowatt system, you need 500 squares that you need for a 50 kilowatt system. If you need a 100 kilowatt system, 100 kilowatt peak system, you need 1,000 squares. If you're going to build a 1 megawatt system, you need 1 hectare. So it doesn't take up all that space. Install it onto a roof, you even look at half the sizes